The crystal chandeliers of the Beverly Hills Grand cast prismatic light across tables laden with silent auction items, each piece worth more than most people earned in a year. Mia Cortez adjusted her earpiece and scanned the elegant crowd with practiced efficiency, her dark eyes cataloging exits, potential threats, and the subtle hierarchies that governed this glittering world of wealth and power. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another security consultant hired for the evening, professional but unremarkable in her black suit and minimal jewelry. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to work security for the ultra-wealthy, surrounded by people whose problems require more than money to solve? Tonight's charity auction was supposedly raising funds for children's hospitals, but Mia knew from experience that events like this served multiple purposes for the attendees. She moved through the crowd with deliberate calm, her movements economical and precise in a way that suggested extensive training to those who knew what to look for. 3 years of civilian life hadn't dulled her instincts, though she worked hard to suppress the hypervigilance that had kept her alive in far more dangerous places. The transition from Navy SEAL to private security consultant had been challenging, but it allowed her to use her skills while maintaining the anonymity she desperately needed. The restaurant buzzed with conversation in multiple languages as servers in crisp, white uniforms navigated between tables, carrying champagne flutes and canapes to guests who could afford to bid 6 figures on art pieces without blinking. Mia noted the strategic positioning of other security personnel, the discreet bulges under expensive jackets that indicated concealed weapons, and the subtle deference shown to certain guests by the restaurant staff. Near the main auction display, a distinguished man in his 50s commanded attention without effort. Lorenzo Valentino carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed, his steel gray hair perfectly styled, and his Italian suit clearly bespoke. He nodded politely to the museum director explaining a particularly valuable painting, but Mia could see his attention constantly shifted to assess his surroundings. She recognized the behavior of someone who understood that wealth and power attracted both admirers and enemies. Lorenzo's entourage included several men who tried to project the same sophisticated air, but one stood out for all the wrong reasons. Marco Rossi was younger, perhaps early 30s, with the kind of aggressive energy that made smart people nervous. While Lorenzo commanded respect through presence and intelligence, Marco seemed to demand it through intimidation and volume. He gestured expansively while talking, forcing nearby guests to step aside, and his voice carried across the restaurant despite the ambient noise. Mia watched Marco grab a server's wrist as the young woman attempted to refill his wine glass, holding her longer than necessary while making a comment that caused her smile to become strained. The interaction lasted only seconds, but it revealed everything about his character. This was a man who took what he wanted regardless of others' comfort, and who used his position to exercise power over those who couldn't fight back. The evening progressed with the usual rhythms of high-end charity events. Wealthy bidders competed for status as much as art, driving prices higher with each raised paddle. Mia maintained her circuit of the room, checking in with other security personnel through discreet earpiece communications and monitoring the crowd for anything unusual. Her training made it impossible to simply enjoy the elegant atmosphere. Every gathering was a tactical situation requiring constant assessment. As the auction reached its climax, she noticed Marco's behavior becoming increasingly problematic. He had consumed significant amounts of alcohol and grown louder and more inappropriate with each glass. When a young waitress accidentally brushed his shoulder while serving dessert, he grabbed her arm and pulled her close enough to whisper something that made her face flush with embarrassment and fear. Lorenzo appeared to notice his associate's behavior as well, his expression tightening with displeasure. However, he was engaged in conversation with several potential business partners and couldn't immediately address the situation without drawing unwanted attention. Mia could see the calculation in his eyes as he weighed the social cost of publicly correcting Marco against the reputational damage of allowing the behavior to continue. The tension escalated when an elderly couple from what sounded like the Midwest approached Marco's table, clearly tourists who had somehow gained access to the exclusive event. They were dressed appropriately, but lacked the casual confidence that marked true insiders. and their excited conversation about the artwork and celebrities present marked them as outsiders in this world of carefully cultivated sophistication. Marco's attention fixed on them with the predatory focus of someone who had found an acceptable target for his aggression. He stood from his chair with deliberate slowness, his movements carrying the threat of violence that made nearby guests unconsciously step away. The elderly man, oblivious to the social dynamics at play, smiled and extended his hand in friendly greeting. What happened next would change everything for Mia, forcing her to choose between the anonymity she had carefully constructed and the protective instincts that had been drilled into her through years of military training. As Marco's smile turned cruel and his hand moved toward his jacket, she realized that her quiet evening of routine security work was about to become something much more dangerous. The elderly man's outstretched hand hung in the air as Marco Rossi looked him up and down with unconcealed disdain. Harold and Betty Mitchell from Kansas had saved for years to attend this charity auction, their genuine excitement about being among such distinguished company radiating from their faces like children at their first Broadway show. "You people don't belong here," Marco said, his voice carrying just enough volume to attract attention from nearby tables. His words sliced through the refined atmosphere like a blade through silk. Harold's smile faltered but didn't disappear entirely. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're guests of the museum board. My wife Betty here is a retired teacher, and we've always supported children's charities." Marco stepped closer, invading Harold's personal space with practiced intimidation. The scent of expensive cologne mixed with alcohol created an oppressive cloud around him. "I don't care what you think you are. This is a private function for people who matter. People with real money and real connections." Betty reached for her husband's arm, her maternal instincts sensing the danger that Harold's Midwestern politeness couldn't process. "Harold, maybe we should find our table," she whispered, but her voice carried in the sudden quiet that had fallen over their section of the restaurant. From her position near the auction display, Mia felt her muscles tense as she recognized the escalation pattern. She had seen this type of predatory behavior in countless situations across different continents. Marco was establishing dominance through humiliation, testing boundaries to see how far he could push before someone stopped him. The problem was that in this rarefied environment, most people would look away rather than risk confrontation with someone who clearly belonged to the dangerous underbelly of legitimate society. She began moving toward the situation with casual efficiency, her path appearing random to observers but calculated to position her for intervention if necessary. Her earpiece crackled with reports from other security personnel who had also noticed the disturbance, but protocol required assessment before action. These events attracted powerful people who often had complicated relationships with each other, and security was expected to be invisible unless absolutely necessary. Marco's voice grew louder and more aggressive as he continued his verbal assault on the elderly couple. "You want to know what I think about your charity work, teacher lady? I think you're pathetic. Coming here pretending you're sophisticated when you probably shop at Walmart and think Olive Garden is fine dining." The cruelty in his tone sent ripples of discomfort through nearby guests, but no one moved to intervene. This was the social paralysis that predators like Marco counted on in civilized settings. Everyone present had too much to lose by getting involved in someone else's problem, especially when that someone carried himself with the unmistakable aura of organized crime. Harold's face flushed red as his protective instincts finally overcame his desire to avoid conflict. "Now listen here, young man. You have no right to speak to my wife that way. We've done nothing wrong, and we're not going anywhere." Marco's expression shifted from contempt to genuine anger at being challenged by someone he considered beneath notice. The change was subtle but unmistakable to anyone trained to read violent intentions. His shoulders tensed, his stance widened slightly, and his right hand drifted toward his jacket in an unconscious preparation for escalation. That's when Mia knew the situation had moved beyond verbal intimidation into potentially lethal territory. She closed the distance between them with swift, purposeful steps, her civilian cover requiring her to appear concerned but not professionally trained. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Marco with the tone of a worried bystander rather than security personnel. "Is everything all right here? These folks look like they might need some assistance finding their table." Marco turned his attention to her with the predatory focus of a shark detecting blood in the water. "And who exactly are you, sweetheart? Another tourist who doesn't know her place?" Mia smiled politely while her mind calculated angles, distances, and potential weapons within reach. "Just someone who thinks everyone should be able to enjoy the evening without trouble. Maybe we could all take a step back and let these nice people find where they're supposed to be." Her words were carefully chosen to give Marco an opportunity to de-escalate without losing face, a technique she had learned was often effective with men whose aggression stemmed from insecurity about their status. Unfortunately, Marco had moved beyond rational calculation into the kind of alcohol-fueled rage that made violence almost inevitable. "You know what?" Marco said, his hand moving deliberately toward the bulge under his jacket. "Maybe all three of you need to learn some respect." The movement was slight, practiced, and would have been invisible to civilian observers. But Mia's trained eye caught the telltale signs of someone reaching for a concealed weapon in a crowded public space. Her military training kicked in with automatic precision, overriding every instinct for self-preservation and anonymity that had governed her civilian life. Time slowed as her body moved with the fluid economy of motion that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of combat training. She stepped inside Marco's reach before he could clear his weapon, her left hand intercepting his wrist while her right struck the nerve cluster at his elbow with surgical precision. The technique was designed to temporarily disable his arm without causing permanent damage, but executed with the speed and efficiency that marked her as something far more dangerous than a concerned bystander. Marco's weapon clattered to the floor as his arm went numb from the nerve strike. Before he could react or call for backup, Mia had swept his legs and controlled his descent to the marble floor, maintaining just enough force to neutralize the threat without causing serious injury. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds and ended with Marco flat on his back, disarmed and immobilized, while Mia stood over him with calm professionalism. The restaurant fell into stunned silence as 200 of the city's elite processed what they had just witnessed. A quiet woman in a security consultant's suit had just dismantled a man who radiated violence and criminal authority with movements so precise they seemed almost choreographed. From across the room, Lorenzo Valentino watched the entire sequence with the calculating gaze of someone who understood exactly what he had witnessed. His steel-gray eyes tracked every detail of Mia's technique, from the angle of her initial strike to the controlled takedown that left his volatile associate embarrassed but unharmed. This was not the lucky intervention of a concerned citizen. This was the work of someone with extensive military training, someone whose skills had been honed in far more dangerous places than Beverly Hills charity auctions. As Marco struggled to regain his bearings and the shocked murmur of conversation began to resume, Lorenzo made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The aftermath of Marco's humiliation created a strange bubble of calm in the elegant restaurant. 2 security guards helped him to his feet while he nursed his bruised ego and temporarily deadened arm, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage. Harold and Betty Mitchell had been quietly escorted to their proper table by the museum director, who apologized profusely for the misunderstanding while shooting nervous glances toward Lorenzo Valentino. Mia attempted to blend back into the crowd, hoping her intervention would be forgotten among the evening's other distractions. She moved toward her assigned position near the auction display, her heart rate slowly returning to normal as adrenaline faded from her system. 3 years of civilian life had dulled her reflexes slightly, but muscle memory from her military training had taken over the moment she recognized a lethal threat developing. "Miss," a voice said behind her, cultured and calm with just a hint of Italian accent coloring the words. The voice carried the kind of natural authority that made people stop and listen without conscious thought. Mia turned to find Lorenzo Valentino approaching with measured steps, his steel-gray eyes studying her with the intensity of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. He had removed himself from his business conversation and crossed the room deliberately, his attention focused entirely on her despite the dozens of wealthy and powerful people competing for his notice. "Lorenzo Valentino," he said, extending his hand with old-world courtesy. "I wanted to thank you personally for helping resolve that unfortunate situation." "Mia Cortez," she replied, accepting his handshake while noting the calluses on his palm that suggested he was more than just a businessman. Just doing my job, Mr. Valentino. Security consultants are hired to handle problems discreetly. His smile was polite but calculating, the expression of someone who had built a fortune by reading people accurately and quickly. Indeed, though your particular approach was quite impressive. Most security personnel in this environment prefer to call for backup rather than handle situations personally. She could feel him probing, testing her responses for inconsistencies or reveals that might expose more than she intended to share. The conversation felt like a chess match where she was several moves behind someone who had been playing the game much longer. Training and experience, she said with a modest shrug, hoping to deflect his attention without appearing evasive. Private security requires adaptability. You never know what kind of situation might develop. Lorenzo nodded thoughtfully, but she could see his mind working behind those intelligent gray eyes. His gaze lingered on her posture, the way she unconsciously positioned herself to monitor exits and potential threats, the controlled precision of her movements that spoke of extensive conditioning. Where did you receive your training, Miss Cortez? Your technique was quite sophisticated for civilian security work. The question was casual in tone, but loaded with significance. Mia felt the first stirring of real concern as she realized this man possessed the knowledge and experience to see through her carefully constructed cover story. Most people witnessed violence and focused on the drama or emotion, but Lorenzo had watched her technique with the analytical eye of someone who understood combat at a professional level. Various programs, she replied carefully. Executive protection, threat assessment, defensive tactics. The usual certifications required for high-end security consulting. It was a reasonable answer that would satisfy most curious civilians, but Lorenzo's expression suggested it fell short of his expectations. He seemed to be comparing her words against some internal database of knowledge, cross-referencing her technique against patterns he recognized from previous experience. I've worked with many security professionals over the years, he said, his tone remaining conversational while his eyes never left her face. Military contractors, former police officers, executive protection specialists. Each background creates distinctive approaches to threat neutralization. Mia felt sweat gathering between her shoulder blades despite the restaurant's air conditioning. This man was systematically dismantling her cover story with the patience of someone accustomed to extracting information from reluctant sources. She needed to redirect the conversation before he reached conclusions that would shatter the anonymity she had worked so hard to maintain. Experience teaches adaptation, she said, attempting to sound professionally confident rather than defensive. Different situations require different responses. Lorenzo's smile widened slightly, but there was no warmth in it. True, but the specific technique you used on Marco suggests training that goes beyond civilian security programs. The angle of your initial strike, the nerve cluster targeting, the controlled takedown. These are not techniques taught in standard executive protection courses. Her mouth went dry as she realized he possessed detailed knowledge of military combat training. This wasn't casual curiosity from a wealthy businessman impressed by unexpected competence. This was professional analysis from someone who recognized the difference between civilian self-defense and military close-quarters combat. I've had extensive training, she said, knowing the words sounded weak even as she spoke them. Yes, Lorenzo agreed, his tone taking on a harder edge. The question is where and from whom. The precise targeting of the radial nerve while maintaining situational awareness of potential backup threats. The way you controlled his descent to minimize injury while ensuring complete neutralization. Most importantly, the calm professional demeanor throughout the engagement. Each observation struck her like a physical blow as she realized he had cataloged every detail of her intervention with expert precision. This man understood violence at a level that suggested personal experience with military or paramilitary operations. Mr. Valentino, I appreciate your interest, but I really should return to my duties, she said, hoping to escape before the conversation progressed any further toward dangerous territory. Of course, he replied smoothly, but made no move to let her pass. Just one more question, if you don't mind. Professional curiosity from someone who has employed many individuals with specialized military backgrounds. Mia felt trapped. knowing that walking away now would only confirm his suspicions while staying risked exposing secrets that could destroy the life she had built. She nodded reluctantly, bracing herself for whatever penetrating question he had prepared. Lorenzo studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes seeming to weigh her soul before speaking the words that would shatter her carefully constructed facade forever. What unit turned you into a SEAL? The question hit her like a physical blow, stripping away 3 years of careful deception in 6 simple words. Her training had prepared her for many forms of interrogation, but she had never expected to be identified so completely by a criminal businessman at a charity auction. The precision of his analysis, the confidence of his conclusion, and the casual way he delivered the question told her everything she needed to know. Lorenzo Valentino wasn't just a sophisticated crime boss with legitimate business interests. He was someone who possessed intimate knowledge of military special operations, someone who could recognize Navy SEAL techniques because he had worked with them before. Her silence stretched between them like a loaded weapon as she realized her civilian cover had been completely destroyed by someone who understood exactly what he was looking at when he watched her work. The weight of Lorenzo's question hung between them like a blade poised to fall. Mia stared into his steel gray eyes and realized that denial would be pointless against someone who possessed such intimate knowledge of military special operations. Her carefully constructed civilian identity lay in ruins, destroyed by 6 words from a man who could read violence like other people read newspapers. Team 6, she said quietly, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff into unknown darkness. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. 8 years active duty before I transitioned to civilian life. Lorenzo's expression shifted from analytical curiosity to something approaching satisfaction, as if she had confirmed suspicions he had been developing throughout their conversation. He nodded slowly, processing the significance of her admission with the gravity it deserved. That explains the precision, he said. DevGru operators are trained to handle threats with minimal collateral damage and maximum efficiency. Your intervention with Marco displayed exactly that combination of skills. The casual way he referenced her unit's classified designation sent a chill through her system. Most civilians had never heard of SEAL Team 6, and those who had typically knew only Hollywood versions of the truth. Lorenzo spoke with the familiarity of someone who had worked directly with special operations personnel. How do you know so much about military training, Mr. Valentino? She asked, needing to understand what kind of man she was dealing with before this conversation progressed any further. His smile held secrets that she suspected were darker and more complex than anything she had encountered in her military career. My business interests occasionally require consultation with individuals who possess specialized skill sets. Former operators, intelligence professionals, military contractors. People like yourself who understand how to handle complicated situations with appropriate discretion. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise what he was describing. Lorenzo Valentino operated in a world where violence was a tool of commerce, where former military personnel found employment protecting criminal enterprises or eliminating obstacles to business success. She had heard rumors of such arrangements during her transition to civilian life, but had deliberately avoided any opportunities that might draw her back into that world. I left that life behind, she said firmly. I have no interest in using my training for criminal enterprises or violence for hire. Lorenzo raised his hands in a gesture of peace, but his eyes remained calculating. I'm not offering you criminal employment, Miss Cortez. My legitimate business interests are extensive and require protection from those who might seek to cause harm through illegal means. I need someone who can defend against threats, not create them. She studied his face carefully, looking for signs of deception while weighing her limited options. Her cover was blown, which meant her current employment as a security consultant was probably finished. Word would spread through industry networks that Mia Cortez possessed capabilities far beyond what her resume claimed, attracting exactly the kind of attention she had spent 3 years avoiding. What kind of threats? She asked, hating herself for showing interest but needing to understand what he was offering. Rivals who target my family to gain leverage in business negotiations. Former associates who believe violence is an acceptable solution to commercial disputes. Government agencies that prefer to handle certain matters through unofficial channels rather than legal proceedings. Each category he mentioned represented a different type of danger, but also suggested that his enterprises operated in gray areas where conventional security couldn't provide adequate protection. She had encountered similar situations during her military career, where politics and economics created environments that required specialized skills to navigate safely. The transition from military service to civilian life has been challenging, she said slowly, testing whether honesty might create mutual understanding. Finding purpose for skills that were developed in extreme circumstances isn't easy in normal society. Lorenzo's expression softened slightly, showing the first hint of genuine empathy she had seen from him. Many of the operators I've worked with describe similar difficulties. Society expects you to simply turn off years of training and conditioning, as if specialized skills can be forgotten when they're no longer officially required. His understanding felt authentic in a way that surprised her. Most civilians either fetishized military service or dismissed it as irrelevant to their world. Lorenzo seemed to grasp the complex reality of transitioning from environments where violence was necessary and authorized to societies where it was regulated and condemned. I've been searching for someone with your particular combination of skills and integrity, he continued. Someone who could provide security for my family and legitimate business interests without crossing moral lines that would compromise your principles. Before she could respond, commotion erupted near the restaurant's entrance as Marco Rossi returned with 3 men who carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of professional muscle. His earlier humiliation had clearly stung enough to demand immediate retribution, and he had recruited backup to ensure the confrontation would end differently this time. Looks like your former associate doesn't accept defeat gracefully, Mia observed, automatically shifting her position to assess the developing threat while calculating potential responses. Marco has always been more interested in appearing dangerous than actually being effective, Lorenzo replied calmly, though she noticed his own posture subtly adjusting to prepare for potential violence. Unfortunately, his pride occasionally creates situations that require more sophisticated solutions than he's capable of providing. The 4 men moved through the elegant crowd with obvious hostile intent, their focus fixed on the area where Lorenzo and Mia stood talking. Other guests began moving away from their path with the instinctive recognition that violence was approaching, creating a clear corridor toward their target. Your security team seems to be positioned too far away to intervene quickly, she noted, counting the seconds it would take for the threats to reach them while evaluating available improvised weapons and defensive positions. An unfortunate oversight in planning, Lorenzo agreed. It seems I may require immediate assistance from someone with specialized capabilities. She could hear the implicit offer in his words. This was no longer a theoretical discussion about potential employment, but an immediate test of whether she would use her skills to protect him when faced with genuine danger. The choice would determine not only what happened in the next few minutes, but also what kind of person she had become during her transition to civilian life. The 4 men were halfway across the restaurant when Mia made her decision, stepping forward to place herself between the approaching threats and Lorenzo while her mind began calculating the tactical approach needed to neutralize multiple opponents in a crowded public space without causing civilian casualties. I hope your offer of employment includes comprehensive medical coverage, she said quietly, feeling her military training surge back to life as she prepared to discover whether 3 years of civilian softness had dulled her edge too much to handle professional violence. The most comprehensive available, Lorenzo replied, and she could hear the satisfaction in his voice as he realized she had chosen to stand with him when it mattered most. The confrontation with Marco and his reinforcements had ended as decisively as the first encounter, though this time Mia had been forced to engage multiple opponents simultaneously. Lorenzo's private dining room now served as a quiet sanctuary where they could discuss business without the curious stares of shocked auction guests or the hovering presence of law enforcement asking uncomfortable questions. Mia sat across from Lorenzo at the mahogany table, a bag of ice pressed against her bruised knuckles, while she considered the formal offer he had presented. The terms were generous beyond anything she had encountered in civilian security consulting, but the implications of accepting employment with someone like Lorenzo Valentino carried risks that went far beyond simple professional considerations. The salary alone would solve every financial concern that had driven her to accept increasingly questionable security assignments over the past year. $200,000 annually, plus comprehensive benefits, housing allowance, and performance bonuses that could double her base compensation. It was more money than she had ever imagined earning outside of extremely dangerous military contracting work. "You understand my hesitation," she said, setting down the ice pack and meeting his steady gaze. "Working for someone in your position means accepting certain realities about the nature of threats we might face." Lorenzo nodded thoughtfully, swirling the amber whiskey in his crystal tumbler before responding. "I won't insult your intelligence by pretending my business interests exist entirely within conventional legal boundaries. However, the position I'm offering would focus exclusively on defensive security rather than offensive operations." The distinction mattered more than most people would understand. Her military career had required both types of missions, but the psychological weight of protection work felt fundamentally different from missions designed to eliminate targets. She could live with using her skills to defend innocent people. She wasn't sure she could return to deliberately taking lives for commercial purposes. "Define defensive security," she said, needing to understand exactly what moral boundaries she might be crossing before making a decision that could define the rest of her life. "Protection of my family during public appearances and travel. Security assessment for business facilities and private residences. Threat evaluation when dealing with potentially hostile business associates or government agencies. Investigation of credible threats against people under my protection." Each responsibility he listed fell within parameters she could accept without compromising the ethical standards that had guided her transition to civilian life. These were legitimate security concerns that any wealthy businessman might face, though she suspected the threats Lorenzo encountered would be more sophisticated and dangerous than typical corporate security challenges. "What about situations where defensive action isn't sufficient?" she asked, probing the edges of what he might expect from her. "If someone threatens your family and negotiation or legal remedies aren't available options, then you would be authorized to use whatever force is necessary to neutralize the threat," Lorenzo replied without hesitation. "I'm not asking you to be passive in the face of violence directed at innocent people." The clarity of his answer satisfied something in her that had been frustrated by civilian security work where legal constraints often prevented effective protection of clients. Her military training had been designed around the principle that good people deserve protection from those who would harm them, regardless of political or legal complications that might interfere with that mission. "I need autonomy in tactical decisions," she said, beginning to negotiate specific terms now that she had decided the work itself was acceptable. "If you hire me to provide security, you have to trust my professional judgment about how threats should be handled." "Agreed," he said immediately. "I didn't serve in special operations myself, but I've worked with enough former operators to understand that micromanagement defeats the purpose of hiring elite professionals." His ready acceptance of her condition impressed her more than the generous salary offer. Most wealthy clients wanted to feel involved in security decisions, often overruling professional recommendations based on emotional reactions or political considerations. Lorenzo seemed to understand that effective protection required trusting the people you hired to do the job they were trained for. "The housing allowance covers a secure apartment near my primary residence," he continued, outlining practical details that demonstrated serious planning rather than impulsive recruitment. "Armed vehicle provided for transportation, with maintenance and insurance covered. Medical coverage includes trauma care and psychiatric support, which I understand can be important for former military personnel." The mention of psychological support suggested he possessed genuine understanding of the challenges faced by combat veterans transitioning to civilian life. Most employers either ignored mental health considerations entirely or treated them as liability issues rather than legitimate medical needs. "Trial period?" she asked, wanting to ensure both parties could withdraw from the arrangement if circumstances proved incompatible. 6 months, with either party able to terminate without cause upon 2 weeks' notice. Full severance package if I decide to end the arrangement, and positive references for future employment regardless of circumstances. The terms were more than fair, approaching generous to a degree that made her suspicious of hidden obligations or expectations. Her experience with military contracting had taught her to be wary of deals that seemed too good to be true. "Why me specifically?" she asked, studying his face carefully for signs of deception. Los Angeles has dozens of qualified security professionals available for hire. Former special forces operators, retired law enforcement, experienced executive protection specialists. What made you decide you needed someone with my particular background? Lorenzo set down his whiskey glass and leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully before answering. Most security professionals in this environment are reactive rather than proactive. They respond to threats after they develop rather than identifying and neutralizing them before they become dangerous. Your military background suggests strategic thinking combined with tactical capability. The explanation was reasonable but felt incomplete, as if he was sharing acceptable portions of a more complex truth. She suspected there were specific threats or challenges that had driven his search for someone with her exact qualifications, but she could understand his reluctance to share operational details before their professional relationship was formalized. Additionally, he continued, most contractors with elite military backgrounds prefer to work for government agencies or corporations with established security infrastructures. Someone willing to work independently for a private client suggests both professional confidence and personal circumstances that make alternative employment attractive. The observation struck uncomfortably close to her actual situation. Traditional security companies had been reluctant to hire someone whose military service included classified operations that couldn't be verified through normal background checks. Private clients offered more flexibility, but usually lacked the resources to properly utilize her capabilities. Lorenzo represented something between those options, providing substantial resources while maintaining operational independence. Personal circumstances, she repeated, testing whether he had investigated her background beyond what she had revealed during their conversation. Everyone who transitions from military service to civilian employment has reasons for making that choice, he replied diplomatically. I'm less interested in your past than in your future potential to help protect people who matter to me. The answer satisfied her need for privacy while acknowledging that he understood her situation better than most potential employers. She found herself appreciating his combination of professional competence and personal discretion, qualities that were rare among people who operated in gray areas between legal and illegal enterprises. When would you need an answer? She asked, realizing that she had already made her decision, but wanting to maintain some illusion of careful consideration. Tonight would be preferable, Lorenzo said with a slight smile that suggested he had reached the same conclusion about her decision-making process. My daughter has a school function tomorrow evening that would benefit from professional security assessment, and my wife has been concerned about recent incidents involving other business associates' families. The mention of his family transformed the abstract job offer into something personal and immediate. These weren't theoretical security challenges, but real people who needed protection from dangers that required specialized skills to understand and counter. The transition from military service to meaningful civilian purpose suddenly felt within reach for the first time in 3 years. All right, Mr. Valentino, she said, extending her hand across the mahogany table. You have yourself a head of security. 6 months later, Mia stood in the shadows of the museum's marble columns, watching Lorenzo's 14-year-old daughter Isabella accept an academic achievement award while scanning the elegant crowd for potential threats. The transition from anonymous security consultant to head of personal protection for the Valentino family had proven more fulfilling than she had dared hope during those dark months of civilian adjustment. The autumn gala celebrating gifted students from private schools across Los Angeles attracted the same wealthy elite who had witnessed her confrontation with Marco at the charity auction, but now she moved among them with confidence and purpose. Her role as Lorenzo's security chief was well established, earning respect from both legitimate businessmen and those who operated in society's gray areas. Isabella's acceptance speech demonstrated the same intelligent confidence that characterized her father, though her world remained blessedly separate from the dangers that shadowed his business interests. Protecting that innocence had become Mia's primary mission, one that gave meaning to skills she had feared would remain forever tainted by their violent origins. Lorenzo sat in the front row with his wife Sophia, both parents radiating pride as their daughter spoke about pursuing scientific research to help solve environmental challenges. The normalcy of the family moment struck Mia as profoundly beautiful, a reminder that her work enabled good people to live, without constant fear of those who might harm them for personal gain. Her earpiece crackled softly with updates from the security team she had assembled over the past months. Former military personnel like herself, carefully vetted and trained to provide protection without unnecessary aggression. They formed an invisible shield around the Valentino family, present but unobtrusive during public appearances. Movement near the museum's eastern entrance caught her attention as three men in expensive suits entered with the predatory awareness she had learned to recognize in potential threats. Their positioning and communication patterns suggested coordination rather than coincidental attendance, triggering alert protocols she had developed for family protection. Team 2, possible interested parties entering from main gallery. She spoke quietly into her microphone. Maintain observation distance and report any aggressive positioning. Copy that, Chief, came the immediate response from Tony Ricci, a former Marine sniper whose steady demeanor made him perfect for crowd surveillance. 3 subjects, professional bearing, no obvious weapons, but positioning suggests tactical awareness. The threat assessment unfolded with practiced efficiency as her team gathered intelligence while remaining invisible to both the potential dangers and the innocent civilians sharing the space. This was protection work at its most sophisticated, requiring constant vigilance balanced with absolute discretion to avoid disrupting normal family activities. Lorenzo caught her eye from across the room, raising an eyebrow in silent question about the increased activity among her security personnel. She responded with a subtle hand signal indicating elevated awareness, but no immediate action required. Communication developed over months of working together in various environments. The 3 suspicious individuals turned out to be federal agents conducting surveillance on several attendees, including Lorenzo himself. Standard procedure for law enforcement agencies monitoring organized crime figures, but requiring careful management to prevent escalation into public confrontation that might endanger innocent students and families. All teams, federal surveillance confirmed, she reported through her earpiece. Standard monitoring protocol, no hostile intent detected. Maintain current positions, but reduce profile to avoid drawing official attention. The evening concluded without incident, Isabella receiving her award while her parents watched with unconditional love and pride. As the crowd began to disperse, Mia coordinated the family's departure with her usual attention to potential choke points and escape routes, ensuring their safe return to the secure compound that had become her second home. During the drive back to the estate, Lorenzo turned to address her from the passenger seat, while his wife and daughter chatted quietly in the back about college preparation and career possibilities. "Another successful evening thanks to your professionalism," he said, genuine appreciation evident in his voice. Isabella was able to enjoy her moment without concern about outside interference, which means everything to Sophia and me. "Just doing the job," Mia replied, though she felt deep satisfaction at his recognition of her team's effectiveness. "Your daughter deserves to pursue her dreams without worrying about threats that have nothing to do with her choices." The conversation reminded her why she had accepted employment that others might consider morally complicated. Isabella Valentino was brilliant, kind, and completely innocent of her father's business activities. Protecting that innocence from those who might exploit it for leverage or revenge felt like the most important mission she had ever undertaken. Back at the estate, Mia conducted her evening security briefing with team leaders while Lorenzo and his family settled into the domestic routine that her presence made possible. The house that had once felt like a fortress now functioned as a genuine home, where a teenage girl could focus on homework and college applications rather than security concerns. Later, as she completed her final perimeter check before retiring to her apartment on the estate grounds, Lorenzo joined her in the garden, where she often walked to decompress from the hypervigilance required by her position. "You've given us something we hadn't experienced in years," he said, walking beside her among the carefully maintained rose bushes that Sophia cultivated as a creative outlet. The ability to live normal family moments without constant fear of what might be lurking in the shadows. She understood what he meant more deeply than he probably realized. Her own transition from military service had been marked by the same hypervigilance that now served to protect his family, the inability to fully relax that came from years of training designed to keep dangerous people alive in hostile environments. Finding purpose for those skills and protection rather than destruction has been healing for me as well, she admitted, surprised by her own willingness to share something so personal with an employer who had become something approaching a friend over the past months. They walked in comfortable silence through the garden, two people who understood the weight of responsibility that came with capabilities most civilians could never comprehend. The autumn air carried the scent of roses and jasmine, peaceful aromas that reminded her how far she had traveled from the harsh environments where she had first learned to fight. "Thank you, Mia," Lorenzo said as they approached the gate leading to her private quarters, "for giving my family the gift of normal life, and for finding a way to honor your service in work that builds rather than destroys." The genuine gratitude in his voice touched something deep in her chest, validation that her decision to accept his offer had been correct despite the moral complexity of his business empire. She had found her purpose again, using elite skills to protect innocents rather than eliminate targets, creating safety for good people who deserve to live without fear. As she settled into her apartment and reviewed the day's security reports, Mia reflected on the unexpected path that had brought her from that Beverly Hills charity auction to this moment of professional fulfillment and personal peace. Her military training had finally found its proper civilian application, serving justice and protection rather than political objectives she might never fully understand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and potential threats, but tonight she could rest knowing that Isabella Valentino would sleep safely in her own bed, dreaming of college and career possibilities rather than worrying about the dangerous men who might wish her family harm. For a former Navy SEAL seeking meaning in civilian life, there could be no greater victory than enabling such innocent dreams to flourish. The thought brought her the kind of deep satisfaction she hadn't experienced since leaving military service, confirmation that some warriors were meant to be guardians rather than destroyers, protectors of the light rather than agents of darkness. In Lorenzo Valentino's employment, she had finally found her true calling. What did you think of Mia's journey from hiding her military background to finding meaningful purpose protecting an innocent family? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between safety and doing what felt right, even when the situation wasn't black and white?